All right, welcome back, everybody. This hour we have a different presentation from Rachel Porcelli. She's going to talk to us about the power of a consultative approach in developing stellar solutions. And Rachel is the creator of international content, frameworks, and programs to facilitate the flourishing of people and organizations. So looking forward to this presentation. And Rachel, I will turn things over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining this session of the iDTX conference. My name is Rachel, and again, I'm just delighted to be here today. So I want to open with a short quote by Albert Einstein, who said, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions." What I think he's getting at here, and what I'm hoping to talk more about today, is that solving the wrong problems is costly, inefficient, and discouraging. And therefore, and I hope you'll agree with me by the end of our time together today, using a consultative approach well is critical for the long-term success of nearly any endeavor, and is especially critical for responding to problems with solutions that stick. So I hope that by the end of our time today, you will be convinced of the same things and will walk away with a few principles to help you in your work and in your life. So with that, just a brief outline of our time today. I'm going to give a short introduction here, and then the majority of the time is going to be spent talking about some theory around these principles, and then a little bit of practice as well. And again, I hope that you can take away at least one thing that's going to help you in your work and life as a result of this session today. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Rachel, and again, I'm delighted to be here. A little bit about me. I live outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the United States with my husband and our dog, and I've spent the last 10 years in the training and learning and development world, including a variety of internal and external consulting roles, and even within that, some formal and some informal roles. And I currently work full-time for a global membership association and also do some consulting on the side. And I'm really excited to dive in with you all today. So just as a recap again, the way we're going to spend our short time together today is partly in theory and partly in practice. And so I want to start with our learning outcomes, just so you all know what my goal is for you all in this time. So the 3 learning outcomes that I hope you walk away from this being able to do is to 1, be able to define a consultative approach. 2, be able to identify the significance of the discovery phase of the consultative process. And 3, apply investigation and inquiry principles given an opportunity to practice with a case study. So there's a lot there, and we only have a little less than 30 minutes now. So hopefully this is meaningful to you and you're able to take away something from this time together today. My big idea for this time is that using a consultative approach well is critical for the long-term success of nearly any endeavor, and is especially critical for addressing problems, concerns, and opportunities with solutions that stick. There's a lot there in that big idea, so we're going to go ahead and break some of that down step by step. But first, I need to ask a question, and maybe this is a question you're asking yourself too. Why? Why does this matter, and what does this matter for? This matters because almost nothing exists in and of itself. Almost everything we interact with involves dynamic systems, people, operations, procedures, and this list could go on and on. Whether you are a student or a CEO or somewhere in between, you most likely face obstacles and opportunities for which a consultative approach to thinking and navigating will benefit you tremendously. For those of you in the room who are learning and development professionals, we are tasked with the opportunity to change people's lives through effective learning opportunities. So asking the right questions to the right person or of the right thing at the right time in the right way is critical. We want to identify the correct problem, concern, or opportunity instead of trying to solve the wrong things with the wrong solutions. And at the end of the day, what this leads to is our legacy and our impact on the people and things that we interact with. To create meaningful solutions that outlast us, we need to develop some basic consulting skills. So the bottom line here is I want to help you live and work better. So let's start with one quick note about an assumption that I am making here. This assumption is that I'm assuming that all of us here already use some sort of a consultative approach in our lives in some way. And here's what I mean by that. All of us in small or big ways have to identify underlying problems, concerns, and or opportunities in some capacity. And in some small or big ways, we respond to those things or maybe even create solutions to address them. So here's an example. Maybe you're a parent and your child went through a phase, or maybe they're in a phase right now, of not wanting to go to bed at night. One way to approach this is to have them tell them just to go to bed. And I fully recognize this can be a perfectly appropriate response given your unique context. Another approach to this scenario could be to get to understand the underlying reasons why your child doesn't want to go to bed. And what you might discover may help you understand how to solve this problem with a different solution. Here's another example. In the workplace, you might be in charge of implementing a project, but you recognize that there's something keeping this project from moving forward. One approach to this is just trying to keep pushing forward and hoping that something lands. Or an alternative approach would be trying to get to the bottom of why this project isn't moving forward. So with all of this, let's take a quick poll on the unique ways each of us approach the problems, concerns, and opportunities in our lives. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. So you should be able to see it now. This poll is asking about your approach for understanding problems, concerns, and opportunities in your life. Are you an Apple? A, you have a reliable, systematic approach for understanding the problems, concerns, and opportunities in your life. Or are you B, a baseball? You often use a systematic approach for understanding the problems, concerns, and opportunities. C, are you a camel? You sometimes use a systematic approach for understanding problems, concerns, and opportunities. Or maybe D, a drum. What systematic approach? What's that? Let's just go with the flow. Who needs a systematic approach? So, okay, I'm seeing here in the poll, we've got some responses coming in. A lot of us fall into that B sort of a category, often using a systematic approach. A couple of us use a systematic approach pretty consistently. And then there are a couple of us as well who say you sometimes use a systematic approach. Great. Well, thank you so much. I'll publish those results so that you can see what one another shared on that as well. All right. I'm going to close that. Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing with us where you're at. And wherever you are on that spectrum from A to D, my hope is that maybe something here will resonate with you and help you in some way. So let's start with a couple very basic definitions. So when I'm talking about consulting, I'm using this definition of providing substantive insight, information, advice, opinions, or analysis that requires the exercise of discretion and independent judgment and is based on an individual's knowledge or expertise of a particular subject matter or field of study. I wish I could say those are my words. They're not. They come from lawinsider.com, but I really love that description of consulting. Secondly, a consultative approach, and I want to make a distinction here between these two things. This is applying principles based on consulting best practices to any decision, project, or opportunity. So you can see I've kind of distinguished consulting from a consultative approach, and I think that's important to clarify. One other thing I want to ask of you, do you think you need to be a formal or have the title of consultant in order to use a consultative approach? I would argue no, you do not need to be a formal consultant to use a consultative approach. I think many of us probably in a variety of roles function as an internal consultant within our organizations. Some of us maybe do some external consulting in a more formal capacity. And even within that, there are formal and informal types of consulting that don't require the label or the title of consultant, but having a consultative approach or method can greatly benefit us in a variety of the things that we do in our lives and our work. So what I want to talk about now is my particular consultative approach. I'm going to walk through each stage of this, which is my approach. Again, understanding there are so many approaches out there to consultation and consultative methods. This is the one that I have just found has seemed to work really well for me. So you can see I have sort of these 5 buckets here, and I'm just going to walk through them one by one, and then we're going to actually hone in on one of these categories in just a moment. So this first step of the consultative approach that I have found to be very useful is discovery. The discovery phase is the process of finding out key information, data, and relevant materials and context related to the topic at hand. This can include activities like investigation and inquiry, which, as a little preview, we're going to talk about in much more depth in just a moment. The second phase of my consultative approach is development, which refers to the process of creating materials, resources, and other aspects of the consultative solution. And this would involve things like implementation, integration, program design, development, project design, and project development. Third is the pilot process, and this refers to the process of testing the consultative solution in its intended context. I want to make a note here that the develop and the pilot process sometimes, in my experience, happen over and over and over again. Depending on what you're working on, sometimes it requires going back to the drawing board. So there's a little bit of a cyclical effort that happens between the development and the pilot. Fourth would be the delivery stage of my consultative approach, which involves the process of rolling out the consultative solution to its intended users, stakeholders, and/or its specific intended context. This would involve things like onboarding, training, and other communications around the solution that you've developed. And finally, what I'm calling decoding, and by that I mean the phase of evaluating, assessing, and gathering feedback related to the consultative solution. So this might involve things like data collection and surveys. I want to make a quick note as well. If you have any questions while we're going throughout, you can go ahead and add them into the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end of our time together today. Elizabeth, I see you asked the question, sharing slides. Hopefully you can see visually what I'm sharing on the screen. If you can't, let us know in the Q&A. And then at the very end, I'll let you know how you can receive material from today. Okay, yeah, so any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. So here's the thing, there is so much to this entire process and we simply don't have enough time to go through it all today. But what I want to do is hone in on the part of this consultative process for me that I think is critical for the success of the whole thing, which is the discovery phase. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more specifically now. And I want to make a couple of assertions about the discovery phase. So the first assertion that I want to make about the discovery phase of the consultative approach is that the success of the discovery phase of the consultative approach is the hinge on which the remainder of the consulting process rests. In other words, to be able to make meaningful change and create solutions that stick, we have to start with the foundations of this solid discovery process. This phase is what sets up the rest of our approach for success. And this is also what helps us know if it's a problem we're looking to solve, that we've actually identified the correct problem. So more specifically, in the discovery process, we're doing things like finding out key information, data, and relevant materials and context related to the problem, concern, or opportunity at hand. We are not in this phase responding to it, but we're gathering the things that we will need later on in the consultative process. As we'll talk about in a moment, this discovery phase can involve a number of different things, but I've boiled it down to the most important components of this process, which I think are investigation and inquiry, which we'll talk about more in just a couple minutes. But on a fundamental level, what we have to recognize is that we have to be able to name or define something in order to know what to do with it. In other words, we have to know what something is in its very nature before we can interact with it in a productive way. One very simple way this discovery phase makes the most sense to us is to think of a time when we've been exceedingly upset, sad, or disturbed by something. Maybe you are different from me and you have some magic powers, but for me, it rarely works to just tell myself to just stop feeling the way that I'm feeling without doing some version of discovery to understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling in order to know how to respond to it. The discovery process helps me to know in that situation why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling in order to know how to respond and to feel better, or to resolve those feelings in some type of productive way. I want to give us a brief illustration on this point. So we've all heard the phrase, don't put the cart before the horse, right? Or hopefully many of us have heard of this phrase. The essence of this phrase is that it's important to do things the right way in the right order, or else chaos will follow. Similarly, we start with the discovery phase because doing things in the right order, in the right way, helps us lay a foundation that we'll build on for success in later stages of the solution process. So here we see this principle: commit to excellence in the discovery phase of identifying the underlying problems, concerns, and opportunities before you in order to set yourself up for success later on. Now we're going to look at two very basic ways to apply the discovery phase. So in this first way that we're applying the discovery phase, what I'm calling this the investigative process. And what I mean by that is that a sound investigative process is crucial for understanding the nature of what you're facing. Investigation, in the way that I'm referring to it here, means systematically searching for facts, especially those that are hidden, and it means determining the nature of how or why something is the way it is. And I want to dig a little bit deeper here with this investigative process within the discovery phase. And there are a couple of approaches that I want to share with you. One is what I call the origins approach, And this refers to understanding the nature of the problem, concern, or opportunity. And there are a number of questions I'm going to put out to you that can help you with this origins approach. One, what is or was the beginning of this obstacle or opportunity? Two, how was the problem, concern, or opportunity discovered? How did people know? What is the nature of this problem that needs to be solved? Where did this problem come from? What problems, challenges, or pain points underlie this request? I'm going to give us now a little example of this to help us flesh this out a little bit more. So let's say you are and you're on a learning and development team, and you get a request to develop training materials for employee onboarding. Some of us have maybe been in this situation before. With the origins approach, you could start the discovery phase by investigating why the current employee onboarding is the way it is. Maybe it's actually successful. Maybe it's accomplishing its intended outcomes and you can get much quicker to the solution. Or maybe it's not. And either way, you're going to want to get to why it is the way it is. In doing this, you'd want to search for relevant data or information on challenges with the employee onboarding, including, as I mentioned, whether the current onboarding process is as effective as it could be. Another approach is to look at this through systems, operations, and processes and procedures. And why I think this is so important is because understanding the wider system and how it's impacted or involved in the problem, concern, or opportunity is critical for understanding how we respond to it. So some questions you might ask here. What systems are involved with this problem, concern, or opportunity? What operations are connected to this? What processes or procedures are impacted by this problem, concern, or opportunity? And how does this topic impact other systems, operations, processes, or procedures? Broken down in another way, you could use an alternative framework of looking at the overall organization. You could look at people, you could look at programs and projects. Similarly, asking those very similar questions about how that problem, concern, or opportunity before you impacts and is impacted by the organization overall, people, programs, and other projects. I will make a quick note here. These two ways of thinking about the systems, operations, processes, procedures, or the overall organization, people, programs, and projects is critical in this discovery phase. In order to know, we need to know the results of that in the discovery phase in order to inform the development, pilot, and delivery phases as well. So it's really critical that we take the time we need in that particular, in this particular phase of the process. I'm going to give us a quick example actually from my own experience in a project I'm currently working on. So I've been working on developing a competency model for a large international humanitarian organization. In the discovery phase of this project, I investigated how the felt needs related to this project related to other parts of the organization. So one of the things that came up was that the work we were doing was really related to the hiring, onboarding, and retainment aspects of the organization, largely held within the HR department. We also discovered that the work we were doing on this project would impact how managers relate to their teams and would impact things like the annual review process. So you see in this phase, we discovered that we had to invite a lot of people into the process, from the C-suite level all the way down to entry-level team members. This phase also helped us to uncover adjacent projects going on in different parts of the organization that we would need to collaborate with in order to understand how all these things were related to one another. And I want to offer us one final approach within this discovery investigative phase, which is what I call the competing commitments approach. And in the competing commitments approach, what we're doing is identifying where in the list of priorities in addressing this problem, concern, or opportunity falls within the larger priority scope of the organization. So some questions we might ask here are things like, what obstacles might impact working on addressing this problem, concern, or opportunity? What barriers exist for us to address this now? And are there institutional or systemic barriers or people-oriented barriers, or all of the above? So one way that we can apply this is by using this investigative phase by digging deeper in order to get not only a better understanding of the problem, concern, or opportunity itself, but also how it relates to other things in the system that it exists within. So this might mean doing research and collecting relevant materials to support your investigative process. But what I hope we see here is that this principle remains. Determining the nature of how or why something is the way it is critical for then eventually knowing how to respond to it. Third, and finally, my third assertion within this area of the discovery phase of the consultative process is inquiry, focuses on inquiry. And my assertion here is that asking really good questions helps us understand the nature of things better and helps us conceive of things that could be complex in relation to other things so that we can better understand how to respond to them. And to briefly explain that a little bit more, what I see here is that the act of seeking information by questioning is critical for this process as we go through the discovery phase. This can also be just simply requests for information, and we'll dive into this a little bit more here in just a second. I want to make one clarification. This might sound similar to investigation, and in some ways it is. It is partly an element of investigation. Where investigation refers to a broader approach that includes research and collecting materials, inquiry specifically refers to questioning. So some of the things that you might employ within this approach are things like interviews, focus groups, surveys, or just asking questions in your conversations. And with that, I want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic of questions. So I think there is such a thing as actually a best question. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of really good questions out there. There are even some that we would say are even better than just good questions, but I think there are such things as best questions. So let me give us an example. I think a good question is, what does a donut taste like? That's a good question. That's a fine question, and you'll probably get some good responses if you ask that question to somebody. I think an even better question is, how does a donut get its taste? I think third and finally, maybe the best question in terms of this inquiry process is, what is it that makes a donut special or unique in comparison to a piece of bread? And you see what we're getting at there is that in that best question, what we're really trying to understand is, how does this donut relate to other foods or other types of things? And what is it that makes this thing come alive to us? So we're really looking at, how do we ask those best questions? I think a really simple way to apply the inquiry phase is by asking really good questions. Go beyond asking who questions and what questions. Ask why 7 times in a row, and eventually you'll get to the things that you're really looking for. And also ask about how divergent things relate to one another. And I think that's going to help us as we get to the bottom of this discovery phase. So here we see, distilling all this down into a key principle here, asking really good questions helps us understand the nature of things better and helps us conceive of things that could be complex in relation to other things so that we can better understand how to respond to them. So what I want to do now is actually a little bit of practice. So I've done a lot of theory. I've done a lot of talking. I want to hear from you all. And the way that you can engage with this is by using that Q&A feature So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give us a case study scenario. It's just gonna be a very brief sentence or prompt. And then I'm gonna ask you a question. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So the goal with this practice is to imply investigation and inquiry principles given a true L&D case study. So case study scenario 1. In the scenario 1, you are an external consultant and an organization approaches you to help develop a competency framework. So it might sound familiar. What investigation principles can we apply to just this information so far? So all that we know is that an organization has approached you as a consultant and they want you to help them develop a competency framework. What investigation principles can you apply to just that scenario with the information you have so far? What do you think? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. And I'm excited to see what you think. And I'll give us a second to do that. It might take a minute to think on that. So what investigation principles can you apply to that information so far? And again, the scenario is you're a consultant and an organization approaches you to help develop a competency framework. And while you're thinking about that, let's go ahead and I'm going to give you a second scenario as well. So we can, or actually, I'm just going to dive a little bit deeper into that one, and maybe this will help us too. As part of the investigation stage, you collect materials relevant to this project. So we talked about that. In the material review, you discover that a number of job descriptions are out of date or you can't track them down. What inquiry principles can you apply to this discovery? So what inquiry principles can you apply to this discovery? So we're looking at how do we map on the investigation and inquiry principles to this scenario of helping this organization develop a competency framework. So go ahead, put in the chat box or the Q&A, sorry, with your thoughts. And hopefully we're thinking of things like, questions. So maybe we want to do on that last note of identifying that there's some job descriptions that were out of date, for example. Maybe we need to have some interviews with maybe the HR department and understand, what is the process for developing job descriptions and why is it the case that they aren't up to date, so that we can understand, where some of those roadblocks might be. And I think that's one of the real advantages of being a consultant is a consulting approach, whether it's internal or external, formal or informal, is really identifying where some of those cogs in the wheel are happening, that you can help alleviate them. So hopefully that gives us a little bit to think about there. And I'll leave us with that, those scenarios, and hopefully we can think of some more things as we go from here in terms of how to apply that, the investigative and inquiry principles to our day-to-day. All right, so with that, we are just about out of time, amazingly. This time has flown by. I don't know about for you, but for me it has. So here's what I want to leave us on. I hope that you will take from today whatever works for you and you'll leave the rest. This is really just what works for me in a variety of contexts, but it may not work for you. So I encourage you to experiment and take away what's most useful for you in your context, and that whatever you're taking away from today, you find that you're able to better identify, respond to, and solve your problems, concerns, and opportunities through developing a consultative approach that works for you. So please, just as we wrap up here today, I invite you to please help me and future participants of this session by filling out a brief survey. The survey also includes a link to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with you there. It also has a space where you can indicate if you'd like me to send you a tip sheet based on this session. So Elizabeth, hopefully that answers your question. And then one final perk of that feedback form, it also includes a place where you can indicate if you would like to participate in a small hands-on workshop to develop, practice, and refine your unique consultative approach. So I'm going to go ahead and put that survey in the chat box. And you can also find information on my website there as well. I would love to connect with you beyond this time. And there's also a QR code that you can use to get to that survey too. So with that, thank you all so much for being here today. I have really appreciated this time, and I'm grateful for you spending this time with us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Rachel, for an excellent presentation. I think you've closed things up nicely, so I won't add anything else to it except just to direct people back to Hopin to continue the IDTX conference. So thanks again, and take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.